to a couple of them downstairs, but we're going to get a more detailed exposition to some wonderful books already existing and soon to exist. And here's Linda Hansel to moderate this discussion.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Bruce. Well, welcome all. It's a pleasure to have you join us for this panel on telling our stories. In this session, we get to hear two talented writers, both of whom are passionate advocates for racial justice, read excerpts from their amazing memoirs, followed by time for questions. I have had the honor and the privilege of working with both of these authors on their books, and both books shimmer with personal stories of struggle, courage, success, hard-earned lessons, joy, and much more. Kathy Baxter is a retired educator and fair housing advocate and the daughter of a Unitarian minister. She has been a member of this congregation, Unitarian Universalists of Mount Airy, for over 10 years. Reggie Harris is a singer-songwriter, storyteller, and educator, as well as an expert on the music of the Underground Railroad and the modern civil rights movement. Known for over 40 years as one half of the prominent duo Kim and Reggie Harris, Reggie continues to crisscross the country, carrying the message of joy, unity, tolerance, and peace through the medium of live music. He is also the co-president of the Living Legacy Project, a UU-founded organization that takes people on civil rights pilgrimages through the South. Thank you both for being with us today. Kathy Baxter's book, In the Shadow of the Hanging Tree, was self-published 3 years ago. In the Shadow of the Hanging Tree is the stirring memoir of Kathy's search for greater understanding of the impact that racism has on American life and on the way school children are taught. A childhood trip to Texas shaped the rest of her life, including her decision to spend a semester at an all-black college. Later, as an elementary school teacher, dismayed to discover that the curriculum portrayed only a world that was white, she wrote a curriculum about American slavery called I Want to Be Free, and it was successfully implemented in a number of schools in Philadelphia. Her memoir tells a moving story about the possibilities for change. There are copies of Kathy's books available to purchase if you're interested, and have Kathy sign after the panel. And it is also available on Amazon. Kathy, over to you.
Okay. Christina, get me some water.
Oh, yes. Little bottles, thank you. I forgot, I'm sorry.
Well, first of all, I gotta hear, I need to check to see if you can hear my voice.
I think,
Do I need to speak, can it be raised, or do I just need to talk louder?
McKinley, can you turn up the volume?
Is that better? Okay. Well, my story begins with a tree. In a part of Texas, it became quite a famous tree. It's a magnificent tree, a large and majestic oak. It stands in front of the town hall, spreading its branches over the square. People rest under its shade, meet friends there, take their noonday's break. The tree is a witness to lovers, family picnics, and town ceremonies. I saw the tree on 2 occasions as a child and once as a teenager when my mother, father, sister, and I went to family reunions in the little town of Goliad in southeast Texas. Goliad would not be Goliad without that tree, and yet I had forgotten it during the many years since I had been to Texas. My mother was 77 and beginning to lose her memory. I had always loved hearing her family tell family stories, and she had agreed to tell the old favorites once more and let me tape them so they would not be lost. During one of our taping sessions, she said, louder. Okay, I'll pretend I'm eating an ice cream cone. During one of our taping sessions, is this better? Yes. Okay. During one of our taping sessions, she said something about a hanging tree. Wait a minute, I said. What do you mean a hanging tree? Oh, she said, you know, the tree that stands in front of the town hall in Goliad, the big oak tree. That's where the Saturday night lynchings took place. I turned off the tape recorder and stared at my mother, wondering how she could sound so casual. I had listened to her stories for many years, but I had never heard about the hanging tree. My mind went back to the Texas trip that I remembered most. It was the summer of 1939 when I was 9 years old. We traveled from Maine to stay with my grandparents, who lived in a sprawling white frame house with a big porch and a big yard. That trip to Goliad stands out in my mind as a major life experience. Things were different there. The southern drawl, the way nobody was ever in a hurry, how everybody's name was Sugar, unless you were somebody's brother, and then you were called Bubba. It all seemed a bit magical, and the grand garden party was the crowning event, for it made me feel grown up and elegant. No Gone with the Wind fantasy of a gracious living could have conjured anything more romantic in my mind. But there were shadows, too. Long, dark shadows that reached inside me and shaped the rest of my life. Race and segregation hung in the air. A white child from a white world. I wasn't used to seeing black people, and I stared at them with great curiosity. Why do they come to the house? I asked my mother. To do the laundry, she said. Why do they always come in the back door? They're not allowed in the front door. Why? My mother sighed as she struggled to answer my questions and tell me that white people and black people could not do things together. But why? Well, honey, she said, it's just the way things are down here, and you can't go around asking people why. I had been told that I should love everybody and that all people were of equal value, but that's not what I saw happening. I have a haunting memory from that Texas trip, as clear in my mind as it was all those years ago. We had gone to visit my mother's aunt. I can still see the secluded white house, circle drive, big long, trees dripping with Spanish moss. It was not a large house, but it seemed elegant to me. It remains in my mind as stereotypically Southern. What caught my attention was a round white gazebo in the front yard. Inside was an old black woman, tall and dark-skinned, sitting very still, her head bent over her work. She was surrounded by piles of clothes that she seemed to be mending. What is that? I asked. My great-aunt replied, oh, her, that's Lackey. What is she doing there? Well, she's one of our servants. She's been with us family for years. Now she's old and not right in the head, but we keep her on and give her easy work to do. My next question was cut off before I could finish it. I was to get no more information about Lackey. The adults moved to the front porch of the house and sat on rocking chairs while my great-aunt served iced coffee. I paid little attention to them, for my mind was on the gazebo. I knew with all my heart that what I saw was not right. The gazebo looked like a cage. Lackey was the prisoner, and that's the way black people were treated. I wanted to let Lackey out of the cage and make everything all right, but all I could do was feel sad. Nobody seemed to notice me. They sat on the porch for the longest time, rocking and talking and sipping iced coffee. For years afterwards, I would dream about the gazebo. From time to time, there would come the memory of Goliad. I would see myself as a child once more, standing on the circle drive, looking at Lackey and longing to set her free. That trip to Goliads shaped the rest of my life. It began to shape me in many visible ways during the civil rights movement, when I went to workshops and trainings on nonviolence, took part in demonstrations, was an active member of the local Fair Housing Council. It was during that time that I read Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett, a book that began my study of African American history. I was an elementary school teacher at that time. Unhappy with the social studies material I had, I wanted to write a program that did not portray the world as lily white. Not sure how to get started, I went to the Green Street Friends School Library to get some ideas. Nothing clicked until I found myself taking an unfamiliar book off of the shelf. It was Mumbet, The Story of Elizabeth Freeman by Harold Felton. By the time I finished reading the story, I knew I had found what I wanted. Elizabeth Freeman was a black slave called Betty or Bet, and later Mumbet. Felton writes that around 1750, when the Mumbet was 6 months old, she was purchased by John Ashley and taken to his home in southwestern Massachusetts. Ashley was one of the framers of the Declaration of Rights in 1773, a document which has been called America's first Declaration of Independence. Ashley was a man who loved freedom and owned slaves. In 1780, a group of men gathered at Ashley's home to write the Constitution for the new state of Massachusetts. Mumbet, who was probably about 30 by then, served the men food and ale as they wrote, and later when they celebrated the completion of their work. She heard the words they had written, that all men are born free and equal. A year later, Mumbet went to court and won her freedom thanks to the words in the Constitution that her slave master had helped to write. Whoops, I think I skipped a page here. I loved Mumbet's quiet strength and courage, and I loved the teaching possibilities that lay within her story. My plan was to write 3 lessons for the story of Mumbet, but I kept on going. By the time I finished, I had written 18 lessons. Mumbet was no longer the focus. Her story was now the introduction to a program about slavery at the time of the American Revolution. Her words became the title of the program, I Want to Be Free. In the spring of 1978, I tested I Want to Be Free in 6 Philadelphia schools. I had good teachers and responsive children, and I loved working in all the schools, but my heart was in Kensington. With its reputation as being the most racist part of Philadelphia, that's where my program would be put to the greatest test. I figured at the time that if I could teach in Kensington, I could teach it in anywhere. It was there in Kensington that I met Larry Owens, one of the first black teachers who had been assigned to Kensington. Larry was the teacher I'd been hoping for, enthusiastic about the program and willing to teach it in spite of the controversy it might provoke. Larry said I was just the person she had been hoping would come along, that my program was exactly the kind of thing she had been looking for. Larry's students were a special class. All of them had difficulties both socially and academically. They were labeled the dummies and the troublemakers of the school. Larry was determined that these children would succeed in her class and begin to feel good about themselves. She thought she would rewrite parts of I Want to Be Free to make the reading easier, but found that she didn't have to. When I visited at the end of the first lesson, Larry was glowing. She told me the children loved the program and were reading it without much trouble. For the first time, they were enjoying social studies. The children were happy to see me, eager to tell me about Muhammad and how much they liked her. Larry asked some questions to get them started, but they didn't need much prodding. These white children were excited to be learning about black people. One day, a girl came up to me after class and shyly said, "Mrs. Baxter, I like your program a lot." When I asked her why, she said she had never known before that black people were important.
Are there questions for Kathy? I see Pat DeBrady has a question. I think we need to give her the mic. What is, oh, okay.
You're gonna have to switch to.
Ah. Excuse me.
Now, usually, I can be heard without.
But I'm going to levelly demand that you use it so we can hear it on Zoom.
Oh. Aha. The age of technology strikes again. Kathy, I'd like to ask you, in what year you were in, or what years you were in Kensington?
1970. What was it, 1979? Late 1970s. One of the ways to that I remember of the approximate time was shortly before personal computers came in, and I typed the whole program on an electric typewriter.
Yeah, you said you tested it in the spring of 1978, and then...
In 78?
Yeah.
You know and I know that black teachers were not necessarily assigned to Kensington before 1965. All right, I came into the system circa 1961, 62, and I was one of the first teachers asked to go to District 8 or District 6 in the Philadelphia school system.
That was the time that this district was making a point, right, of putting black teachers in every district?
Please repeat that.
That was when, as I understand it, the school district was putting black teachers in every district at that time.
Yes, at that point, we were enabled to go from the two districts to which we had been restricted, 2 and 4, into 6 and 8.
Yeah.
My husband chose to teach in District 8. I stayed in District 4.
Now, what part of the city was District 8?
This was North Philadelphia for me, and for what has become a black neighborhood, my husband went to Kearney School, which I think was in District 6. That was in 8 also. I remember much of what you are speaking about because children and my reasons for staying in District 4. And perhaps you can tie that to your last comment, the last thing that you read. I never knew that black people had any importance.
That is one of my most outstanding memories of the time that I worked with that program. Why did this 9-year-old white child in Kensington, why was she glad to know that black people were important? Why did that matter to her? That just that fascinates me and makes me happy that happened with that program. And how did she have the understanding that that was important? Her shift in feeling.
Because if you understand the dynamics of Kensington, which persist to today, although they have been disrupted by another racial group,
Yeah.
because Hispanics have moved into
Right, it was
Kensington.
white working class when I was there.
And during the time that I taught in Philadelphia, Kensington elected to send some of its white children to Germantown schools, which were predominantly black, because they had fractious relationships with the Hispanic children who were not passive about their identity. And the choice was made by parents then in, oh Lord, I stopped teaching in this, 30 years ago. So at that point, the city was changing. And Hispanics were not passive about their culture in Kensington. And I want you to know also that I'm pleased with your title. I see it as a corollary to James Cone's The Cross and the Hanging Tree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bruce?
Kathy, could you share what the reception of your program was on the main line and the impact on you?
I don't know how to answer the first part of your question, the effect on them.
recalling that you were locked out of the main line. Your program was rejected and you could not get
Yes.
hired anywhere.
Oh, I see what you mean, yeah. No, I always had problems with, in fact, I was banned in my own school district from speaking. The point of my purpose in writing this program and experimenting with it as I did was to show, I hoped it would show, that programs can be taught anywhere if you do it with some kind of understanding of perhaps the area where you're teaching. But I wanted to prove that it could be taught in Kensington. And what happened, what it showed was really the story of Mumbet. That was a story that kids loved. They loved Mumbet. They thought she was brave, and they all loved Mumbet. And that was the handle through which they found meaning in the program. And maybe being children, you catch them early enough, they're more accepting.
And we should add, oh, sorry, go ahead, Portia.
Thanks, Kathy, for bringing that up. What it opens up for me is the notion of passing for black, passing for white, and your experience being on the margin, that people couldn't tell who you were. And when she talks about the incident that happened in the main line, that was the incident where I remember the black lady left your board and a white lady left your board because they were angry that you wanted to teach white kids about racism.
Yeah, that was a real problem that I faced everywhere I went during those years that I was active. We started a library on the main line, and the other teachers who came on board, the other people who joined the library, which I started, had wanted nothing to do with white people. This was a library for black children, and to me, the importance of reaching white people was obvious and crucial. We're never going to make much headway with our racial dilemma in this country if white people don't begin to understand that they are affected also. I'm trying to think of the name of the man who said, black folks lose their lives and white folks lose their souls. Somebody remember who said that? Anyway, yeah, we're all involved, and I also wanted to prove that this could be done in an area like Kensington, and it was. And the teachers, it was wonderful. The teachers all in that school all began to love the program. They all wanted to be part of it, and the kids loved it. And anyway.
And we should mention that Kathy recently revised the curriculum, and it is now available for free on a curriculum database developed and hosted by the Center for Active Learning in International Studies at the University of Southern California. So if any of you are interested in learning more about that or how to access it, see us afterwards.
Oh, also, thank you for bringing that up. I have revised well, it's the program you're talking about, but I have revised it in. I have the top copy. It's a Word program. If anybody wants to see it, I'll just send it to you. It's a shorter program. It's not 18 lessons anymore. It's I think it's down to 8. I think it's down to 10 lessons. I think it's a good program. I've made use of some original materials. I am told that I live in Bluebell. I am told that several of the school areas around me have absolutely banned the teaching of slavery. But look at the way it could be done through the story of a real human being, Mumbet. But I have a copy of that program if anybody would like to see it.
Any other questions? Brooke? Wait 1 second, we need to give you the mic.
What happened to it in Kensington? I mean, how long was it there, and then?
What happened to it?
How long did it last in Kensington?
Well, after I left, I worked with Larry, and who was a phenomenal teacher. I left after a year. And 2 years later, she called me. She had established an exchange program that for 6 weeks, students from an all-black school, which no longer exists, but so they came to Louise's class. And she wanted me to come and see this exchange program in action and tell the story of Mumbet in, I think it was 6 different classrooms. This program had not had any support from the administration in Philadelphia schools. They said, you can't do it here, we'll have a cross burning in front of the building. And of course, that didn't happen. It worked beautifully. So she asked me to come down and see this in action. That school eventually established what's the word I want? What did they establish?
Program?
Scholarship?
As a mixed, they opened their doors to
Integration?
to black school, an integrated school, which the administration did not. The administration gave them no support at all, but they established a mixed school, an integrated school. I think, as far as I know, it was the first or maybe only one that was established voluntarily by teachers and parents. She was amazing. But somebody asked how long it lasted. The administration at that time was under pressure from the feds to integrate their schools, and they had white parents demonstrating in the streets who did not want this. We begged them to let us teach our program again in another area district, and they wouldn't let us do it.
So it was a few years that it was there at Marie's school? Like
It
3 or
didn't-
4
As
years?
far as I know, it never went to another school.
No, at Marie's school, it was 3 or 4 years?
Yes.
Thank you, Kathy. Another round of applause for Kathy.
Thank you.
Reggie Harris's book, Searching for Solid Ground, a memoir, will be published this fall by Skinner House Books. Reggie's memoir portrays his physical, spiritual, and emotional journey as a Black performer and champion for justice. His stories and anecdotes are by turns humorous, eye-opening, and deeply moving, on topics including his journey from being a choir kid growing up in North Philadelphia to becoming a nationally touring musician, his work in schools and colleges integrating the arts into the teaching of African American history and current events, dealing with pervasive racism and his struggle to accept his racial identity, discovering that he is descended from both slaves and slave owners, and his developing relationships with his white-skinned Wickham cousins, hearing James Baldwin speak and fueling his passion to fight for justice and civil rights, his painful and poignant journey from death's door to renewed health through the gift of a liver transplant, and much, much more. Searching for Solid Ground, a memoir, is not yet available for purchase or pre-order, but you can check Skinner House Books and Reggie's social media pages to keep apprised of the release date. Over to you, Reggie.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Kathy.
What? Good?
Most of my joyful memories about high school revolve around my time in the Olney High School a cappella choir. One of the hallmarks of my years at Olney was being part of the traveling choir, where every year our director, Mr. Ritchie, would choose 24 choir members of various vocal parts to form a smaller group that he could use to sing at events around the neighborhood of the school and at special events around the city. The choir rehearsed every morning at 7:50 a.m., and that special group would rehearse on Friday afternoons from 2:30 until 4, or maybe 4:30. Between the main choir, the traveling choir, and my voice lessons with Mrs. Gatlin, my church's organist, I got a solid dose of classical repertoire, singing the works of Bach, Handel, Mozart, and composed spirituals and anthems by Black composers like Hall Johnson and Moses Hogan, also sung at my church. We did contemporary music by composers like Randall Thompson and songs from musicals and folk tunes. This cornucopia of sound with all of its musical textures was glorious. I couldn't get enough of the harmonic rapture, the dissonant collisions, the myriad ways that parts and harmonies could be formed, arranged, and resolved in any given piece of music. Within a short time, I made it my business to always learn all the parts and sing them either in the sections in rehearsal or in my head throughout the day. It was an unofficial master class in arranging and composition. The choir rehearsals, and in particular the Friday afternoon sessions with the traveling choir, were both marvelously hard work and a time of special camaraderie. Our director, Mr. Ritchie, turned out to be a master in creating a community of singers whose voices blended and formed a cohesive wave of sound. The traveling choir events also introduced me to new sections of Philadelphia and to a wider range of places, religions, and people I would never have encountered otherwise. I was fast becoming a citizen of the wider world. This widened world, however, was not without its degrees of stress and trauma. I was a poor Black kid going to school outside of my neighborhood and moving into an environment where even the other Black kids, students from Mount Airy and Oak Lane, sections of Philadelphia, would turn their noses up at a kid from Tioga Nicetown, a section only streets away from the ghetto. To keep other students from judging me, I told no one where I lived for the entire 4 years of high school. I felt ashamed of my social location, my lack of financial resources, and my limited wardrobe. But my cover was almost blown one night in my sophomore year when Mr. Nietzsche drove me and a few other choir kids home after a Sunday night concert. Earlier that fall, my mom accompanied me to a concert at one of the big Lutheran churches near the school. And after the performance, my mother talked to Mr. Nietzsche to say how much she loved the concert and that she appreciated his confidence in me. She also expressed her desire to have me participate in as many concerts with the choir as possible, but impressed on him that we lived far away, and that given the limited nature of weekend public transportation service, she was worried about my traveling to such events by myself, particularly coming back through so many neighborhoods at night. As I stood there trying to get her to leave, lest she give away too much information, he praised me and said, "I want Reginald to be with us as often as possible. I promise you that if he can get himself to a concert, I will make certain to get him home to your door." Well, a few weeks later, after another evening engagement, Mr. Nietzsche sought me out and said, "I promised your mother that I would take you home, so you stay close by me until we're all ready to leave." All ready to leave? My brain kicked into gear. Who was all? By the time things had sorted out, Mr. Nietzsche's Volkswagen Bug was filled with 5 other students whose parents he had also promised to drop at their door. We were soon all piled in on each other and ready to ride. My problem was that most of them lived fairly close to him. So he decided that since I lived the farthest away, he would give everyone a treat and make this a fun road trip. I was mortified. As soon as we were in the car, I started to work on him to get me to drop me at the subway. "Oh no, you rouster," one of his favorite words. "I promised your mother that I would bring you to her door, and that's what I'm going to do." 2 more tries at a diversionary drop went unheeded, and soon he was giving us all a historic site and area tour as we crossed neighborhoods and passed stores and churches, ranging closer to my area that I didn't want these kids to see. As we got closer to my neighborhood, the other kids in the car began to be more interested in knowing where we were going, and I could see that some of them were getting a little nervous. "Where are we going, Mr. Nietzsche?" one of them asked. "Reginald lives in Nicetown," he replied, and recited some historic facts about the area. We crossed Broad Street, and he continued to entertain and inform the other kids, who got quieter and quieter. We passed the rail yards at Wayne Junction, sped across Hunting Park Avenue, finally arriving on my block. My street was filled with homes of proud working-class black families. The homes were mostly well maintained, but were big, older houses kept up by hard-working people. There was only one tree on our block, compared to the more tree-lined streets where most of those kids lived. I had seen where some of them lived, and my neighborhood, my North Philly row house, was a far cry from the settings of their homes. This was foreign territory for them. Upon arriving at my house, Mr. Nietzsche said to his car filled with fearful, gawking white choir kids, "Young people, this is the beautiful home where our marvelous Reginald lives." And that would turn out to be one of the most amazing gifts any teacher would give me in all my years of schooling. I knew that he saw me. The next day, none of those kids mentioned our trip to Nicetown, and they all still acted like my friends. It would take years for me to deal with being from poverty and to learn that having dated clothes or not living in the right place didn't have to define me. But that night started the healing of my heart in a big way. Theodore Nietzsche was a remarkable man. Race relations were always tense in Philly, and there were often threats from people I encountered to me, my friends, or to the parents of friends I visited. But I usually tried to shake them off as if they didn't bother me. However, some threats were more troubling and required more serious consideration than others. One such incident occurred on a summer night in 1973. As the proud new owner of a 1965 Chevy Bel Air sedan, I'd saved up and bought that oil-burning red beauty of a car for $500. I had even more freedom in moving about the city. I had arranged to see a movie with my friend Stephen, a close connection with many shared interests from high school. After parking on the street in front of his house, I went up to ring the bell and was greeted by his mom. His sister and I had been classmates in school, so I knew the family well. We talked for about 20 minutes, and then Stephen and I departed for the movie. Some moments after we left, his mother got an alarming phone call from a neighbor who had obviously watched our interaction. An angry voice screamed into the phone, "If that N-word ever comes to your house again, you won't have to worry about having a house. We'll break every window and burn your house down." An interesting and potentially unwise threat on a block of row houses. On our return to the house at midnight, Stephen's mother met us in the street and directed us around to the back, where she frantically explained about the phone call. Still shaking, she recounted the message tearfully and told me that while she still wanted Stephen and me to be friends, she needed me not to come to the house again. Out of respect for them and a renewed awareness of the possible consequences, from that day on, I picked up Stephen 3 or 4 blocks away from his house whenever we met to go out. Other friendships at this time suffered from similar incidents and reactions, as I discovered that white parents of girls I knew often called each other to discuss the Reggie problem. He's a nice kid, but do we really want him dating or marrying our daughters? These experiences were deeply hurtful and wounded me emotionally for years, and there were so many of them. Each time I had an experience like this, my self-image took one more hit. These people said they knew me. Feelings of disenfranchisement and fears regarding race and my otherness were constant companions. From my personal experiences, school lessons, books, magazines, movies, and the mostly all-white TV programs that played on TV, I got the message loud and clear. All things are not available to you. Get used to it. And yet, something in me would not consent to that reality. It felt wrong to me. I had a hard time understanding or believing that my mere presence was the problem. The pain, confusion, and loneliness I felt compared to try to right these situations. It fueled an early desire, born of my own need and longing, to heal my hurts and work to make myself feel whole. The only way I knew that to do that was to try to make others feel good, to affirm them, and somehow gain their trust. My goal was to build friendships that could then begin to set the world back right. Looking back, I see that in my desire to overcome my own personal powerlessness, I found solace and purpose in trying to shift the paradigm. But I didn't know at the time how heavy the weight of these ongoing accumulated slights and rejections would grow to be, nor fathom the full emotional toll of my efforts to be a bridge builder. I didn't speak about these internal tensions to anyone, and I did my best to bury my feelings of pain, confusion, and dismay until I sought counseling and race relation training later in life. My experience of trying to span the great divide between the races showed me just how wide the chasm is. Welcome to the world of bridge building in America, Reggie Harris. I have come to see myself as a cultural ambassador who spreads healing and hope through music and story. As a performer, I am most often found presenting for audiences that are comprised of people who don't look or perhaps even talk like me. In truth, I work mostly with and for people who often don't share my social location, history, or culture. In short, I play mostly for white folks. Hence, my role as a cultural ambassador. Like most African American males, I've learned and had to master many skills that have enabled me to navigate and survive the tricky terrain of being black in America. These skills include reading people and audiences, observing behavior, dealing with aspects of oppression, coping with disappointment, code switching, being able to shift linguistically and behaviorally between black and white cultural norms, fronting, putting on a facade to impress people, keeping a low profile for safety, smiling to reduce conflict, and engaging in non-threatening behaviors so as not to offend whites, and trying to promote solidarity. It's a daunting 24/7 task. I am frequently asked how I, as an African American male, found my way into discovering and choosing this mission of cultural ambassadorship in a nation that has had such a painful and intractable problem with racism and prejudice. Crossing into this role required some deep thought, as well as a commitment to doing lots of interior personal work. It required developing patience and getting training to acquire a level of knowledge, savvy, and skills that most people of color simply find too hard, too invasive, or too exhausting to be worth the effort. But I felt called to this bridge building work. I see several strands in my life that led me to this path. First, my family of origin, which I address in the Hickory Hill chapter of this book, that put me in the racial cultural mix from the beginning. A conjugal master-slave union between a black woman, Bibhana, my great-great-great-grandmother, and her white owner's son, Williams Carter Wickham, forged a history between the white Wickhams and the black Hewletts, which gives me a remarkable context on both sides of the color line. I am both lines in blood and historical history. I was made to be a bridge builder. Second, I lived a childhood that had me integrating schools, youth groups, sports teams, and other social gatherings at a time when laws were changing and to some degree, hearts were opening to the call of racial healing and diversity. I found myself having friends of all races and backgrounds, and often had to, or chose to, absorb the tension present in those groups to move them to unity. Looking back, I guess it's not surprising that I was voted best personality in a high school class of over 1,000 students, at a school where race riots had erupted just 2 years earlier. I didn't campaign, I made friends. Third, I have an innately deep passion for fairness and justice. I have always felt the need for justice at the core of my being, and that it must be of value in the groups to which I find myself drawn. Even in competition, I have a very strong desire to have justice and equality at center. In basketball games, for example, when playing without a referee on the playground or in a gym, I chose to call my own fouls. It just felt wrong to try to gain an unfair advantage, even if we lost. Fourth, I was steeped in the music and freedom of the Black Baptist Church growing up, and those songs, hymns, stories, prayers, and parables are deeply embedded in me. They constitute a root from which my intercultural bridge building grows. My early experiences of leading prayers And singing in the church choirs helped me develop the skills I use every day as a professional musician and ambassador. Stage presence, a strong voice for singing and oratory, the ability to be present in the moment, to use humor and emotion to captivate an audience and hopefully to inspire them. It has been a fascinating, challenging, and fulfilling task to find the right material, balance, pace, and language to share what I feel compelled to present, trying to reach people who are not of my background or culture. As an ambassador, I have to walk a fine line between telling the truth of my people's history, which is often brutal and disturbing, and not alienating people. It's hard work, but it's a risk worth taking. As a cultural ambassador, I am here to build bridges, to spread love and not hate. Sometimes this requires sublimating deeper feelings of anger and grief. It has been a journey filled with complexity, and it's a role that I've taken on with a healthy degree of joy, some fear, a huge amount of respect and caution. But this is clearly what I was born to do. My ancestors left me with a collection of cultural gifts: resilience, persistence, hope, faith, and the ability to move among and make friends from different cultures. They also passed on the narratives, music, folk tales, visual art, and creative language which has influenced all aspects of American culture and life. Like a set of comfortable hand-me-down clothes, these gifts are imbued with an awareness of the past. They offer protection from the harsh heat of hate and from the icy cold winds of loneliness as I travel places near and far. I sing to spread hope and the promise of a more just world. I use my cultural wisdom to join like-minded hearts of all races, colors, and ethnicities and backgrounds to find greater understanding and move beyond racism. That is worth waking up for.
Are there questions for Reggie?
How did you end up in a high school so far from where you lived?
It's in the book.
It's in the book.
I was blessed, as so many people from our community were. A lot of the elders would always be looking out for kids who they thought needed to be lifted up, accelerated. I was in sixth grade. My mother went to a meeting at my elementary school, and someone at that meeting told the parents of their graduating kids that we could go to the school right up the block. That there was Gillespie Junior High was 2 blocks up the street from my house. And they said, you can have your kids go to Gillespie, or they could go across town to J. Cook Junior High. And whoever was giving this message told the parents that J. Cook was a better school, meaning white kids go there. So my mom came home and informed me that I was going to go to J. Cook Junior High School in the fall. And so that's where I went. I took a subway and a train, a trolley, and walked a couple of blocks and landed in a schoolyard with a lot of kids who didn't look like me. I went to that school for 2 years, and in 8th grade, my mom went to another meeting, this parent-teacher meeting, and she met my homeroom and history teacher, Mr. Nicholas, who was a very light-skinned black man who I was in his homeroom and his history class. So on meeting me, Mr. Nicholas said, Mrs. Harris, I love having Reginald in my class. He gets along with all the other kids, and he's a very eclectic boy. And my mother came home to say, Mr. Nicholas says you talk too much. I said, that's not what he meant, Mom. Now, that was also true. But then he asked her, he said, so Reginald's going to be here for another year. He's going to go to 9th grade. Where will he go to high school? And my mother said, well, more than likely, he'll go back to our neighborhood and go to Gratz. It's right up the street, right next to Gillespie. And he said, well, you know, Reginald is a different kid. And I think that he would probably be better served going to the school that most of these kids are going to. And my mother said, well, where's that? And he said, Olney High School. It's a little farther away. And she said, well, is it a better school? And he said, yes, Miss Harris, it is. She said, how does he get in? He said, well, I'll call you. And he inquired and then called my mom about a week later, and he told her he can go to Olney if he agrees to take German for 4 years. So Reginald went to Olney, and I took German for 4 years, most of the time in a class with half of the kids speaking German at home. And a racist teacher who found out that I was going there only because I was taking German. So for 3 years, she tried to flunk me out. But that's how I ended up at Olney High School.
Hi, Reggie. Really nice to hear from you. And you also, Beverly, your story is really powerful. Linda shared with me off the record that in working with you on this book, that you had an somewhat interesting experience with meeting the other folks you were related to that you mentioned. Can you tell that story a little bit?
Sure.
Great.
And for those of you, well, you get an advance because I was going to tell some of this story tonight in the concert. But in 1992, one of my relatives finished doing our family genealogies, a cousin on my mother's side, the Hewletts, and she got inspired by roots and plunged into she got stories from her mother and her grandmother and did the family route, and then she started going to societies and you know, plunging into the archives, and discovered that our family started on a plantation called Hickory Hill. And that Hickory Hill, she was living in Richmond. Hickory Hill is about 25 miles north. Some of my family lived still in Ashland, Virginia, where it is. So she compiled all this information into a booklet, and we had a family reunion that year. And she told all of us that our family had this beginning. So we were part of 250 some enslaved people on this plantation of 3,000 acres owned by one of the founding families of Virginia, the Wickhams and the Carters. If you look back in Virginia history, these were the powerful founding families. So we got this information, and she had all this stuff about the Hewletts and our family tree, and then information about Hickory Hill, the plantation, and information about the Wickhams, and gave this all out. And so I carried that information around for a bunch of years. And in 2010, when I was teaching in North Carolina at the Swananoa Gathering, a music camp for adults, one afternoon, in sharing some information, I was teaching about the spirituals and talking about relationships in slavery, and I came up a half an hour short on the material that the class was really engaged, and I was looking for something else to add to the afternoon's lesson when I remembered that I had this connection that nicely folded into what we were talking about. So I decided to share that with the class and told them I had this relation. Williams Carter Wickham, who was the Confederate general who held the property, at that time, also was a state legislator, and after the Civil War, he was president of the C&O Railroad. He owned these 250 people, And he had 6 children by Bib Hanna, who had been living on that plantation. She was born there. And out of that union came 6 children, and that's the start of my family. So I shared that information with the class that day, just figuring it was a nice tie-in to Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, and we discussed that for about a half an hour, and I dismissed the class. And on her way out of the class, one of my students came up and said, "You're not going to believe this, but I know members of the Wickham family." And I grew up with a girl named Lisa Wickham, and I haven't thought of her for 30 years, but I know she's related to that family. And I'm going to try to find her. And if I do, would you be interested in talking to her? And that's how eventually I got connected to the Wickhams.
Hello. I wondered if you could give us a little information about the Living Legacy program, please.
I would love to. The Living Legacy Project is an organization that started with a Unitarian minister, Gordon Gibson, and his wife, Judy. Gordon was one of the many ministers and clergy who answered Dr. King's call when Bloody Sunday happened. Dr. King, after those people were beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, put out a call for people to come, mostly for clergy to come and support the next march. And Gordon was a pastor in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and decided to answer the call, and he went down with several of his clergy friends. Subsequently, he spent some time in the South and then was called to a church in Mississippi and went and served, I think, 19 years and did a number of other things, making friends and building relationships in the South. You know, a white minister coming in places where white ministers generally did not align themselves with civil rights activity. But after serving 2 churches there, he answered a call to Indiana for the last church that he would pastor. And when he went there, he began to tell those people about his time in the South and all of these amazing people that he met. And in the year that he was going to retire, his parishioners said, "You know, you've been talking about the South and these people all these years. When are you going to take us down there to meet them?" And he was surprised by that, but he and Judy said, "Well, you know, maybe we can do that." Well, Judy is organized. She organized the trip with Gordon, and they took their parishioners there. And it was discovered by the Unitarian Universalist Association that this trip had happened. And they thought it would be a great thing if some of the seminarians would be able to go on such a trip. So they called Gordon and asked if he would lead another trip. And he agreed to do that. And they actually took not only seminarians, but also some of the leadership at the UUA. And another group of people heard about it and wanted to go. So they made a 3rd trip, which Gordon said would be his last. And on that trip, Reverend Hope Johnson, Janice Marie Johnson, and Annette Marquis, who were all working for the UUA at the time, they went on that journey and said to Gordon and Judy, "We're going to need you to explain to us how this is done, because this can't die." So Gordon agreed that he would explain, and they took another trip. And it was from that trip that Hope called me and asked if I could join another trip, because she said the only thing they didn't have that was really part of the movement was music. And so I went in 2010 and agreed to do music on the journey. I agreed to go one time. And like Gordon, who is still part of our board of directors, I'm still here and musical education director. What we do is we lead civil rights pilgrimages of 5 to 9 days. We do about 3 or 4 a year. We start in Birmingham, Alabama, usually, and we tour through Alabama, sometimes only Alabama, sometimes only Mississippi. There are trips that do both. We call them pilgrimages because it is really an opportunity to open our hearts and our minds to an experience of change. And we visit 4 or 5 places a day. And the people on the bus were showing films, and we sing and we sing and we sing. And we have times of reflection to take in the information from not only the time of the civil rights movement as it is portrayed in places like the Equal Justice Initiative, Peace and Justice Museum, and Jackson, Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, and the Birmingham Street, Civil Rights Museum in Kelly Ingram Park. We just visit all of those spots. We hear the stories of people who were working then and who are working now in an effort to have our people return to wherever they come from, to use what they learn and what they see to work in their own communities. So if you want to go to no, it's not, we took the UU off, but it's livinglegacypilgrimage.org, which you can also find on my website, reggieharrismusic.com. You can go on the website, find out more about the organization, but also when the pandemic hit, we couldn't put people on buses. So we pivoted and we went online and began having webinars that we had some of the people who are in the South that we would have come and speak, and other people that we've invited. Some are musical programs, some are just panels about civil and human rights, voting rights. We now have 4 different series that you can watch in their entirety. As a matter of fact, one is coming up next week. May 25th, we'll have John McCutcheon and Elise Bryant. I'll be hosting them to talk about the music of the labor movement in America. We are now back to doing live pilgrimages. We've done 4 this year, and there'll be another in November. You're welcome.
Hello, I wanted to thank you for your stories. I really enjoyed them, and I'm looking forward to reading your book. But it struck me that it must be just exhausting, especially as a child, your role as a bridge builder. And I just admire your courage and perseverance to keep doing the work you do. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, as a child, I don't think I knew I was a bridge builder.
Well, Reggie, thank you for your story. And in a nod to the interconnected web in which we live, I'm here because of Gordon Gibson. Mm-hmm. And that story starts indirectly. I'm an amateur historian working deeply on Southern Universalism. And in reading Gordon's book, Southern Witness, Unitarians, Universalists in the Civil Rights Era, I'm reading through the book and I get to the section on Atlanta, and I realize Gordon has repeated some errors in history that have gone on and on and on. So I feel compelled. I've never met the man.
Yeah.
I feel compelled, contacted, spoke to him on the phone, and with great humility said, Gordon, the first page on Atlanta is wrong. And I explained to him, he was gracious. I've since sent them the updates. But he said, if you're interested in this Universalist stuff, you should go attend a Universalist Convocation that's going to happen in Mississippi. Off I went, and here I am 6 years later talking to you because of Gordon.
Oh. Wow.
Any other questions for Reggie? Well, we don't have a date yet. Sometime in the fall is what we're told. We're anxiously awaiting, but you'll hear about it for sure. And Reggie will be performing here tonight in a concert for the Folk Factory. So you'll get to hear not only more stories, but a lot of music. So thank you, Reggie. Thank you, Kathy.
I think we can take a break now. We're going to come back for the, you done? Yeah. Come back for the convocation business meeting at 3 o'clock. And then we're going to go, I think without a break after that, depending on how long it goes, into. Yes, that's part of the meeting. David D'Amico will be speaking as well. And then we'll be doing a showing of the movie documentary about this congregation and the blockbusting that you heard about earlier in the history. There's a documentary including Pat DeBrady. And just one correction so that it's in your head, the social time at 5 o'clock after the movie is going to be in Hale Lounge where we were last night, for those of you who were here yesterday, not in Fellowship Hall, so that we can get the dinner ready for 6 o'clock, the optional dinner for those of you who chose that. And I guess you could still sign up for the dinner and concert if you're interested. Just speak to me about that so we can make sure you're taken care of. All right, so thank you all. Let's give a hand to the panel one last time and see you back here around 3 o'clock.
And Kathy's books are available if anybody's interested.
Kathy's books are up here. If anyone would like to have a signed copy, come on up.